Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This is the third play report for the ShadowDark game that I am running for my regular gaming group. And ShadowDark, of course, is the dark fantasy role-playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published by her company, Arcane Library. So, I guess I'm going to start with a brief recap of where we left our adventures last. And to do that, I'm going to switch over to our region map. Let's see. There we go. Yeah, this is our region map where I have the tokens and also I have the locations. So let me go ahead and zoom in on the section of the map where they are. Here they are. Okay. This is the village of Wardenwood, where the characters basically live and are headquartered. Many of them were raised there. And Wardenwood, if you'll recall from session 1, had been afflicted by a disease that turned out to be part of an infernal poison, or the product of an infernal poison that had been disseminated by a kindly old woman that turned out not to be so kindly. The group of adventurers, or not really adventurers, they're friends and residents of Wardenwood, decided to go out and investigate. And after, by the end of session 2, they had found that the old woman, Drusilla, was really a hag that was hanging out here in this hex that I'm pinging now, and that she was living in a cottage. They were able to determine that Drusilla had some sort of thing going on, some sort of relationship or setup going on, or with a werewolf apparently. And they entered into combat with Drusilla. They killed her, and they also found what they needed to make the antidote for the poison that was afflicting Wardenwood. Given that they needed to, brew the antidote, they decided to hunker down in the cottage and hope that the werewolf didn't attack them. And they were basically able to ward the werewolf off, at least temporarily, by presenting the dead body of Drusilla outside of the cottage and hanging out in the cottage, which is itself surrounded by wolfsbane. So that's where we left them. Now, in terms of the player's side, there's some things that I have to report. So let me make the map a little bigger again. And that is that this set of tokens that you see here is the party that we had last time. We had some changes, however. My friend Andrew couldn't play, so his character Craith was not present for this session. So I'm going to delete his token now. And my friend Jen was not present, so she could not play Githa, who was a new character last time. So we lost our human warlock, and we lost, or one of our human warlocks, and we lost our halfling thief. So both of them were gone. However, my friend Adolfo was able to play, so we are adding a new character to the mix, and that is Gendry, who is a dwarven cleric. All right. And the way that we handled the character absence is that while the characters are still out in the wood, we assumed that Craith and Githa were sort of there and in the background. And then once the characters returned to Wardenwood, we basically had Craith and Githa kind of go their separate ways for reasons that Andrew and Jen will tell us when they return to the table. Andrew actually told me ahead of time, because he assumed that we were going to start back in Wardenwood before we played, and he told me, yeah, Craith is probably gonna, now that we know that that it's not a disease, he's gonna return to his old job of basically escorting people back and forth between Wardenwood and Marin's Hold, which is the other human village that is in the in this region of the world. All right, so anyway, that's what we decided to do. But we didn't begin in Wardenwood again. I wanted to see what was happening in Drusilla's cottage first. And what we ended up doing is actually picking up with Adolfo and his dwarf Gendry. So what I told Adolfo is that Gendry was traveling with a caravan from the north, a merchant's, caravan, for whatever reason. He could tell me whatever. But the situation he found himself in was that they had been attacked, waylaid by a group of bandits, a large group of bandits that they attacked with without warning and with great brutality, and that they killed members of the caravan. That some might have escaped. He wasn't sure, but I said for whatever reason, Gendry got away. And I didn't want to dictate the terms of him getting away. I wanted to allow him, and I told him, like, you can set up whatever sort of emotional or psychological situation you want with Gendry, right? Maybe he ran because he was a coward, or maybe he ran because he knew they were overwhelmed, but there was one person that he could save and he went to save them. Or maybe he got knocked unconscious and fell behind like a log or something when, and was forgotten or whatever. I said, you can design whatever sort of situation you want to play with, but whatever you say, whatever authority you take in terms of defining that, you are you escape the situation and you're wandering in the wood. Okay, in a strange wood at that. So Adolfo opted for saying that Gendry was had a moment who's lawful. He's a lawful cleric, but Adolfo said that in the moment of crisis, given the overwhelming presence, that there was a little bit of chaos represented by fear that entered him, and that he fled. And that there was that he thought he saw another person that went into the wood too, and that Gendry told himself that he was fleeing to maybe help or save that person, but that deep down inside he knew that he had had a moment of failing, right? And that he was sort of wandering through the woods, struggling with what that meant. I'm like, holy moly, Adolfo, you went like hard on your poor character already. Like you're really setting him up for a tough situation. And then he described, I said, okay, I told him, you're going to be wandering in the wood for a couple of days. So how do those, a couple of nights, like a couple of days and one night, and we'll pick up with you on the second night. And he said that the first night he was wandering through the wood, kind of confused, and that he would find like a hollow in a tree that he can kind of back into and go to sleep. And I couldn't help it, right? We have, Rowena, our witch, played by my wife, Lauren, is a treeborn, and she was found in the wood, in the hollow of a tree, right? So I just had to make that the same hollow, right? I didn't plan to, but he mentioned a hollow. There was a hollow that was mentioned earlier so I said, I paused that there, and I said that, yeah, he did kind of like find a hollow that he kind of retreated into, and he dreamt that night. And that, the chaos feelings that he himself gave his character, right, had kind of like, they were kind of torturing him in his sleep, but that, through that there was a momentary kind of clearing of his mind, and that he saw, he didn't know it at the time, but he saw Rowena, standing there kind of looking sort of healthy and, and powerful, and at peace in a spot in his dream, right? And implied in the forest, right? Remember, I think that Rowena is being treeborn. She is like representative of whatever natural beauty and natural health, right, kind of lives in this forest. That's just part of her background, and that gave him some measure of peace of mind. And so then we talked about how Gendry kind of stumbled. The next day he kept traveling through the wood, and by that late night, he started to hear a wolf howling in the distance and whatnot. And of course, what Gendry ended up doing is stumbling upon the cottage. And the cottage, on the evening that the party had fought Drusilla. And he stumbled upon the cottage at a point where the wolf had already left. And I described how, there was the broken body of this tall kind of, like a horrific woman lying in front of the cottage. And then, the cottage with like smoke coming out of the chimney because they were brewing stuff inside and all of that. And then I let the characters interact. Gendry went and knocked on the door. They were hesitant at first, but they had some questions back and forth. They let him in. He saw Rowena. He talked about her being in his dream, and and they had some good character moments in terms of all of that. And now that the characters were introduced, I sped up time a little bit. I went through and checked what everybody was going to do that night, and then we basically move them back towards Wardenwood. This time I was a little more careful about doing the rounds, right? The initiative order that you're supposed to do in ShadowDark, even when you're not in a combat situation. I was dutiful about checking for wandering monsters or random encounters on the way back to Wardenwood. The characters managed to make it back to Wardenwood without incident. And so it's at that point that I explained that, Githa slipped away for whatever Githa things that she wants to do. That Kraith, picked up a job to go and escort a group that had just come in towards Marin's Hold. And then we talked about how the party came back with the antidote. I rolled randomly to see how people had fared while they were gone. And sadly, one person, one of the 5 people in town who were ill, died before they can come back with the antidote, but the others survived, and they were able to basically save the life of everybody else. And then we started moving into the advancement system for ShadowDark. And by the way, I've got ShadowDark here. It finally came in, my physical copy, but I gave experience points, and I think I mentioned this in an earlier thing. I'm using a system where, normally it's only treasure that you get experience points for here. I've kind of created a system where I have equivalents of like the types of encounters that can give experience points, and also the kinds of exploration and discovery that can give experience points. So the characters had earned, they didn't come back with a lot of treasure. They had some treasure, but not a lot. But they'd still earned enough experience to get pretty close to second level. And then they decided that they wanted to go carousing, right? So we use the carousing system here in the book to earn more experience points by expending their treasure. And it's interesting because some of the results on the table in the ShadowDark book didn't seem appropriate for a settlement as small as what we imagine Wardenwood to be. So we reinterpreted it a little bit. So the mechanical effects were the same, but we reinterpreted it a little bit. And also we needed to reinterpret it because they're in a setting where everybody knows everybody, including them, and they have long histories with one another, especially for the people who grew up in Wardenwood. So some of the encounters or the situations that appear on that carousing table don't seem to fit that kind of situation or setting. So again, we reinterpreted those a little bit, and it was fun doing that reinterpretation. As a consequence, many of the characters went up to second level. The only ones that did not go up to second level, they were just shy, were Brother Bernard. I'm saying his name right this time. Last time I was calling our poor knight of St. Idris, I was calling him like Brandon. At least I didn't call him like, well, I was going to say like Barney or something like that. Nothing against the Barneys out there, but it just doesn't fit the character. No, it's Bernard. So Brother Bernard did not raise in level, and neither did our half-orc fighter, Ursula, right? But everybody else got up to second level. And we after doing the mechanical rolls, we talked, because I think the characters ended up being robbed, right? When on in the rolls on the table, the characters ended up getting robbed. And again, that didn't make sense for the residents of Wardenwood. So what we said was that there was a group of people here that were passing through, they were not residents, that they had kind of partied with these people, and the people had been relatively charming and interested and engaged, and that they had maybe partied with some of these people, and that the people had then when the party was drunk and stuff, taken some of the treasures that they had brought back. And one of the things that they took was the sword. They had found a really nice sword. It wasn't magical, but it was like beautiful, well crafted, and all of that, and ornamented and all of that. And they had given the sword to Ilana, who was the proprietor of Gede's Hearth, the inn where is a community center, and they had mounted it on the over the fireplace and stuff like that. So it was really kind of a treasure for the community and a marker of what this community had been through and all of this. And it was kind of the party's gift to the town, right? So rather than spending their treasure, they kind of like commemorated, the event, and and added to the place and the community. And these people that came through, these passerbys that took advantage of them, took that and took other things. Something else I should add before we, as we were reinterpreting the carousing events, we decided that, part of this was that the town threw a big celebration for the heroes, a big feast for the heroes, a big party for the heroes, because they had saved the town. But we'd said that this was about a week after they returned, because obviously not everybody made it out alive. This one person had died from the town. And so there was like a week of proper mourning before there was a celebration, right, of life. And so the taking of that sword was disrespectful at that level too, right? And it was cool because the characters, the players, seemed to feel that as a loss, and their characters seemed to feel it as a loss. My friend Mario, who plays Asher, who's our other warlock, I'll bring up his character sheet here. As we were describing all of this and working through kind of creating the narrative of what happened during the carousing, he asked me a very specific question. I don't remember what that question was, but it was in reference to the people that had been passing through. And I had him make an intelligence roll as kind of like a memory roll. And I said, you pick up that, like you can, you were probably in a little bit of a drunken stupor or whatever, or maybe if he wasn't drunk, he was hanging out and just kind of watching other people be drunk and stupid and whatnot. And so you had kind of like a whole panoply of faces that, people that you kind of had in your mind and stuff. And as you're starting to think about them now after the fact, and you start to think about the events of the previous week, you realize that one of them seemed familiar. Suddenly you make the connection that the face of one of the people that was here seemed like the face of one of the people that, one of the bandits that chased you guys during the first session, when you guys ran into bandits on the road. And so they're like, oh my God, that was the same group of bandits. They're operating around here, and they were bold enough to kind of like actually come into Wardenwood. And it was around that time too that Gendry started to realize that maybe the bandits his new friends had told him about were the same bandits that had waylaid his caravan coming south. So at that point, the adventurers decided that they wanted to do something about these bandits, right? And they got together as a group, the PCs that are here, the tokens that are here, right? The PCs that are represented by the tokens that are on this screen, got together, and led by Ursula, right? Went outside of the town, and she was able to find the tracks of the people, because the people who were here who stole their stuff had left, you know, you know, had left. It would have been after the gates were closed, so they probably like climbed the gate and dropped down, or just slept out some other way, in a bandity sort of way. But Ursula was able to find their tracks and tell that they had left Wardenwood and were heading east. They left Wardenwood through the other gate, right? And that they were headed east, where I'm sort of pinging now, in that direction. So the party was pretty quick about getting together and trying to follow their tracks. And again, that took them back into hex crawl mode. I rolled for random encounters the first night. They didn't have any. They then, on the second day when they were traveling in this hex, I think it was, they found that the tracks that they were following went into the wood and started following a trail in the wood. And it's at that point that they camped out for the night. And then I did roll a random encounter table. And it was with a group of pixies, if I remember correctly. Let me take a quick look at the Cursed Scrolls book, because I'm trying to remember what kind of... They were definitely fae. They were definitely fae. They were fairies. It was 1d6 fairies. So, and the fairies were eating. I rolled randomly, of course, like you do when you roll random encounters, and it was that the fairies were eating. So I think it was Rowena and I forget who other person. I think it was Rowena and Asher, or I don't know. I forget who it was. Who was at watch, but the people at watch noticed this glow appear in the forest, and then the players made some noise, and then the glows came over to investigate. And when they woke up, Renwick, our wizard, Renwick cast a light spell and revealed, right, all these, like, I think it was like 5 fairies that were all kind of like watching them and stuff, and they had like blue covering their mouths and their hands, because they had been eating like blueberries or something like that, right? And then they tried to parlay, and unfortunately they rolled really, really poorly. It was Renwick who was addressing them. Renwick has a little charisma, and it was just funny because, like, normally players would be like, okay, the one with a higher charisma roll. But I don't know. It just made sense in terms of the way that the situation was going, and just the way people were asking questions, that Renwick ended up, they were trying to parlay with these fairies, and Renwick just ended up rolling poorly, and he ended up with a hostile result. I think at first we got like neutral or suspicious. It was a suspicious result at first. And then Renwick just rolled really, really poorly. And then it turned into a hostile encounter, and the fairies attacked, right? They're like, we're not fooled by you. You guys say that you're trying to track down the demons in the forest or the bandits in the forest or all of that, but you guys are really agents of it. And we don't know what you know about us, but you're not gonna tell anybody. And so the fairies attacked. It was kind of sad because, like, I forget which one of the characters was, and I usually have a really good memory for this, but I'm actually doing this play report like two or 3 weeks after the fact, so my memory is a little fuzzier than it usually is. But I don't remember if it was Ursula or if it was Asher. Actually, just kind of like slapped one of the fairies, maybe batted him with his mace or with a shield or something like that, and it just destroyed the fairy in a single shot. Rolled a morale check, and the fairy's like, and fled, and it's too bad because, parlaying is a good idea and the fairies could have been good allies, but it just didn't work out. Right. So, Then the characters, kind of having finished their rest, they packed up and they continued to follow the trail that they had the day before. And this time they tripped. They ran across a trap. It was like a laid by the bandits apparently, right? Which was kind of like a snare trap. They discovered it before anybody was catched. They set it off, and then they were kind of expecting an ambush, so they waited, but nobody attacked. And then they continued to follow the trail, and then they got ambushed in a bad way. I had them roll perception, and I had the bandits. The bandits had like a sentry basically. Five bandits. Sentries rolled like a 20 on like an opposed stealth roll essentially, and the players rolled a 1 essentially on their perception equivalent, right? Their intelligence roll or whatever. And they got ambushed. Again, Ursula was in the lead. And the bandits got a nasty round of attacks on the party. It really weakened them in a significant way. Renwick went down immediately with an arrow, which started the death tick, going down. The after that initial strike, the players or the adventurers, the player characters, were able to, for the most part, make quick work of them. But one of the bandits, took off running, and the way he was positioned, the only one who could really keep up with him was Ursula. So Ursula and the bandit ran off in one direction. Brother Bernard followed them, but after a certain point, it's not that they were outpacing them, but he couldn't close the distance. So he was kind of like, Ursula's got this. And he, worrying that something else can come back to the party, he let them go on and turned around and came back to the party. The party then spent the rest of the round kind of like, looting the bandits and whatnot. And that meant that Ursula was chasing this guy, and they were chasing. I had them make constitution rolls to see how long they could last before the bandit had to stop, or before the bandit outpaced Ursula. And Ursula won that test mightily. So the bandit, knowing that he was in a tire, turned around, and now they were engaged in one-on-one combat. This fighter and this bandit. Ursula should have been able to take out the bandit, but the bandit had luck on his side, and Ursula did not have luck on her side. So here they are, distant at this point, because this is like rounds and rounds and rounds, right? We basically went out of combat rounds and resolved this like far away from the location. There's no way the other players can get involved. Ursula and the bandit traded blows, and the bandit the bandit took her down. And so I just told Mike, hold on, and rolled to see how many rounds he had to live. But again, the party was, if we broke it into rounds, the party probably been like 20 rounds away, and they didn't know where Ursula was. They didn't know what was going on because they weren't present. So there was no way that the characters can get back to her in time before she died. But I didn't tell Mike that she died. I just said, hold on. And at that point, the rest of the party was like looting bodies and like, hey, where's Ursula? And Bernard was like, well, she went that way, but she hasn't come back. So then they started to worry, and they got together, and they're like, Asher, you lead us. You're I don't know why the party thought that Asher was kind of a tracker, but you're kind of a tracker, lead us. And Asher's like, didn't correct them. So, he started to go in that direction. Bernard also said, at least I know the direction she went. So between Bernard and Asher, they started heading in that direction. And at that point, it was time for me to roll some more random encounters, right? And I rolled a random encounter, and I was like, holy crap, what is it that I got here? And it was 2d6 wolves. And I rolled 11 wolves, right? I rolled 11 wolves. I'm like, oh my God, this is like the worst. And I mean, worse for the party, right? In terms of like an overwhelming force. But also, we were coming to the point where the session was about to close, and you know, I gotta say, before I say this, that I felt if you watched the previous session report, you know that I had some misgivings about session number 2, and I felt like I was authoring too much, like I was kind of like um I wasn't I wasn't allowing things to emerge as much as I was just kind of rewarding players for decisions that they were making for the sake of rewarding them without really having as much grounding in the fiction as or in the situation, better said, than I wanted. And in this session, I felt like I avoided that problem. I felt like everything was pretty emergent and it was fun and it was free and fresh and we were improvising and it was going really, really well. And here we were at this very last moment. The clock was ticking. People had to go to bed. I rolled 11 wolves. And at this point, I made kind of a decision about what it was that those wolves were doing here. And it was emergent in the sense that it came to me in the moment. I hadn't planned it. But I did kind of manufacture it in the moment. And that's that I decided that the lead bandit, who by this point had been warned by the people who had defeated Ursula, the bandit that had defeated Ursula had been warned that the party was around, that the lead bandit decided that he was going to handle this and that he was basically going to meet them. And I decided that he knew he was outnumbered, but he didn't trust his men to do this on his own. He was going to take care of it personally, but he had like a one-use magical token that would allow him to summon a group of wolves to serve him for X number of rounds. So what I did is that I had the characters walking, the PCs following the trail because they noticed that they found where Ursula had fallen. And they noticed that there was blood on the ground, but they also noticed that Ursula had been dragged away. So they were following that trail when they hit kind of a small clearing, and this man who was introduced as an NPC that's in the book. I'm forgetting his name, right? Is it Greaves? Yeah, Greaves Redthorn, right? Greaves Redthorn, who is himself Knight of St. Yidris, who has turned traitor, stepped out of the into the clearing with wolves flanking him, obviously obeying his command, and all the other wolves kind of coming into the clearing too. And then he addressed Bernard. He's like, Sir Bernard, how good that you can join us. I think you and I should go and have a conversation back at my camp. And they kind of exchanged kind of a cool back and forth. They all looked at the 11 wolves and this guy. They knew that it was going to be a tough situation, if not an impossible situation. So they all agreed to go with Greaves Redthorn. They basically took down their guard and followed Greaves Redthorn into the wood. And that's where we ended session 3, right? So next time that I record one of these, which will probably be this weekend or early next week, I will go into session 4. And session 4 is the last session for now. The campaign isn't over, but we've reached a point where we paused. And we have some other GMs who are cycling in to run some stuff for us. So I have a little bit of a break. I have the fourth ShadowDark play report to do, and then I have a one shot that I was able to do right before I left for the new year, which is a one shot of Into the Odd. So I will do both of those videos sometime in the next week and or two. And by then we'll see what we're playing. Also, I'm sending out the email or the text tonight or tomorrow to see if I can call my next Champions Now game together. Now that the group is all able to play again, now it's just a matter of finding a date where we can play Champions Now again. So I'll be able to continue that series. All right. Well, that's it. Thank you for sticking around to the end if you did. And as always, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.